name's Gerald and I'm 22. For the past year, I've encountered a buttload of crazy people and have accumulated even more crazy stories. While most of them would make you laugh, the one I've chosen to share was terrifying while it was happening and still gives me shivers when I remember it. A little more than a year ago, I applied for and got a job at my favorite convenience store across the street from my house. I'd moved there my sophomore year in college and decided to stay after I left school. This little store has served as a savior to me. Living as young men often do, I had very little money, but I was always confident I could find something to fill my belly regardless of how much was in my pocket at the time. So, when the time came, I was no longer able to rely on my parents for money. The corner store was the first place I went for a job. I was in luck. Only the day before, one of the employees was fired for stealing from the register. I took his place, and I've been here ever since. Like any other corner store, we sell alcohol. Beer, wine, liquor, the whole boat. Naturally, this makes us a beacon for the local drunks. These folks have served as countless hours of entertainment. While most are harmless people, on one specific occasion, a horribly violent outburst occurred. It was a quiet Saturday night, about an hour before close. Most of the regulars had made their appearances, a few more than once. The two involved in this incident had been in around 7 p.m. and had just returned. They were, or at least appeared to be, a couple. I'd seen them around the neighborhood since I moved in. The owner of the store said they'd been customers since he bought the store, and that was 13 years ago. Although they were not very talkative when they came in, I never had any reason to believe either could be violent. However, that night something had changed. Upon arriving the second time, they went straight to the cooler containing the quart and 40-ounce size beers. Nothing out of the ordinary, as I said, but tonight an argument between the two started soon after their arrival. Initially, I couldn't hear what it was about, but soon I could hear everything they said across the store. I minded my own business for a while, but once the female began screaming curse words at the man, I felt like I had to at least get them to take it outside. I wasn't sure what to say, but I began my walk to the opposite side of the small store. Before I was halfway there, the man started screaming back at the woman. I'm not sure exactly what she had said to him, but it had obviously infuriated him. Mere moments before, he had taken a quart bottle of Busch or some other cheap beer from the cooler. All of a sudden, he began striking down at the woman's head with it. I'm not sure if he thought it would break or if he intended on hurting her with the nearest thing, but strike after strike he continued. It was a horrifying thing to witness. I blame the entertainment industry for giving people the false impression of how easy it is to break a beer bottle over someone's head. I assure you, it's very hard. Following the fifth or sixth strike, the woman had dropped completely to the floor and stopped moving. The guy stood over her for a moment, but looked up when I assumed he heard me running towards him. The second he saw me, he ran out the side door and disappeared into the darkness. The sight of her laying there made me sick to my stomach. The blood dripping from her ears was almost as shocking as the ever-growing pool around her head. It seemed like a bad idea to touch her, so I made the decision to let the paramedics check her for a pulse. When they arrived, she was still alive, but they didn't have much hope for her survival. The cops certainly weren't in any hurry to get there, but when they did finally arrive, 45 minutes later, I filled them in on all I had seen. From the way they reacted, I got a strong feeling that they were very familiar with the two. While on shift, a few days later, my boss called with some news. The female was brain dead, and her family had made the choice to let her pass. The cops had picked the guy up the following night. From the description my boss gave me, he didn't even seem to remember what had happened. The doctors that examined him said that it's likely he truly may not remember what he did, because of the many years of alcohol abuse had possibly destroyed his brain. Sounds like he might not get the full punishment due to him under the law. I'm not really sure how I feel about that. Sometimes, it seems like people really do get away with murder. I serve as one of two managers for our local branch of a national convenience store chain. Starting as a wide-eyed 23-year-old girl, I worked my way up to night manager within 5 years. Not a groundbreaking achievement, I admit, but an achievement nonetheless. My job includes staying late after closing to count the night's drawers and drop the deposits for the day manager to put in the bank. I've never minded much having to do this job. The past 5 years working here has been on the night shift, and nothing really scary has ever happened while I was on the clock. The only holdup in the history of this store occurred during the day. Therefore, I've never had any reason to fear working after dark. That was until just recently when I became the subject of someone's obsession. Talking about this in the first place is very embarrassing for me. I feel like when people hear about this, they think I am bragging about my looks, but I swear I'm not. I recognize that I'm an average-looking woman, but that's as far as my vanity goes. I would have probably kept this incident to myself, but my therapist feels that sharing my experience will help other women, as well as myself. So, that's why we're here. Hopefully he's right, and this horrible ordeal really can serve to help other women who have suffered from the same form of negative attention. Now that I put this off for so long, I guess it's time to tell you exactly what it is that happened. As I said, I work the night shifts 6 days a week. The number of weirdos I encounter is somewhat high. A fight once or twice a year, homeless drunks, the usual lot for a clerk in a convenience store in America. In spite of the craziness going on around me, day to day, I had managed to go unnoticed by any of those weirdos until around 6 months ago. About that time, this particular man began coming to the store. Initially, it was only once or twice a week, and when he did, nothing was said to me. However, as time passed, his visits became more and more frequent. This, in itself, isn't that odd. Anybody who's worked in a convenience store for a length of time can tell you regulars go with the territory. Some you will see every day at the same time, some more than once. So at the time, I had no need to be concerned. A month into this routine, I noticed that he would wait until I had no customers so I could ring him up. What made it so obvious was his concerted effort to start a discussion with me. How about that weather? You know, small talk like that. Although I found it funny then, I didn't realize I was encouraging him by engaging in these discussions with him. Soon the talks became more personal, less banal discussions. The first time I was asked if I had a boyfriend, I laughed it off, but the third and fourth were the first indication to me that I may have a problem on my hands. My suspicions were cemented the day he asked me out. Perhaps from instinct I said no, but I was careful to be kind in the way I said it. At that moment, he seemed to take it well. However, another clerk told me later that evening that he was actually very angry. I guess I never really learned to read a guy's body language. The next time he came in, he didn't talk to me and didn't return to normal until a few days later, when he acted like nothing had ever happened. I had gotten the impression he had decided to let it go, but just one day later, he asked me to go out with him again. This time, he said he meant it just as friends. As before, I declined. He made no effort to hide his anger this time, and the expression on his face as he stood there really frightened me. The week following this second incident, I spent most of my time hiding out in the office doing paperwork. A male clerk he had befriended told me he had asked about me, but the clerk only told him I was out. I took advantage of this friendship to ask the clerk to talk to the man. I wanted him to ask the guy to not come into the store when I was working anymore. His most recent behavior had scared me. The discussion must have happened because I didn't see him for several days. Curious as to what was said, I asked the clerk what reaction the man had. He only answered by saying that the guy had severe anger problems and I should probably watch my back. I'm not sure if the clerk thought that would make me feel better, but obviously it made me far more scared. He stayed away from the store during my shifts and I didn't see him for a few weeks. One day during shift change, I was talking to the day manager and he mentioned a discussion that he had had with my stalker, as he called him. The manager had made the remark in passing that he didn't normally see him that time of the day. The guy told him he had stopped coming in on my shift because I thought I was too good for him. The manager said as he spoke, his eyes blazed with anger. I'd certainly dodged a bullet. At least that's what I thought then. In the coming weeks, I would catch glimpses of him walking through the parking lot. Sometimes he would stand at the edge of the lot just outside the glare of the lamp and watch me. The last time I caught him doing this, I called the cops. When they arrived, I explained the situation to them, but as you can imagine, they told me they couldn't do anything unless he blatantly threatened me. Of course, by the time they arrived, he was gone. I'm not sure if me calling the cops scared him or not, but I didn't see him for a while. Our last meeting was less than an hour after close, about a month ago. I had just finished the deposits and was preparing to leave the store. As I walked out of the office, heading to the door, I noticed the shadow of a man standing out of the glare of the lamp, just as my stalker had done. Terrified, I called the cops right away. There was no way I was going to leave the store alone at 12:50 a.m. with him standing outside. They showed up in less than 5 minutes, but naturally, he had already left. I got the usual speech, but they were at least kind enough to volunteer to come around for the next week or two at closing and hang around until I could lock up and drive away. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that I heard the news. While I was engaging in work talk with the male clerk, he mentioned that my stalker had ended his own life the week before. I didn't believe him, so we went into the office and he brought the man's obituary up on the computer. Shocked would be an understatement. I knew I hadn't seen him, but I assumed the police presence at close had scared him off. It took me a few minutes to gather myself. I wasn't sure how to feel about this. While he had clearly become a danger to me, I couldn't help but feel bad for him. He obviously had a major anger issue, but I had no idea how bad his life had been outside the store. I've always thought it was important to try and be empathetic towards others. On the other hand, the relief I felt and still feel often overrides any feelings of sadness or guilt I may have. I can only hope that he has found as much peace in taking his life as I have. God, I know that sounds terrible, but honestly, can you blame me? Rest in peace, Robert. I do truly hope you have found the peace you so sorely needed. Recently, a terrible event occurred at the gas station my family owns. And considering the fact the victim was somebody close to the family, I thought this would be the best way for him to be remembered. However, the only way my dad would allow me to share this story is on the condition I didn't use the people's real names. So, anybody interested in looking online for more information surrounding this crime will be disappointed because I'll have to change all the names. I guess I should start by giving you all some info on my family and our store. My dad bought it in 1996. A few years after his wife and he divorced. A few years later, he ran into our mom at the store. They had dated in high school, and she had just moved back after her husband died. They dated for a couple of months and then decided to get married. By March of 2000, my mom was pregnant with my sister and then me about 2 years after. Most of our life has taken place in and around the store. My sister and I both learned to walk there, and many, if not all, of our babysitters were women that worked there. My dad always said that the store itself was part of the family, and that includes everybody who works there. If that's true, Steve should have been the godfather of the family. He'd already been working at the store 10 years before Dad bought it, and he was the one that taught him how the place ran best. They became fast friends, and since he had no living family, he spent every holiday with us. Heck, they even hunted together. That's the reason his death in a holdup hit us so hard. The day after it happened, a call from the cops came into the store asking for the surveillance footage of the robbery. It didn't seem right for Dad or Amy, my sister, to compile it, so I volunteered. I'll surely never volunteer for anything ever again. Going into this knowing what would happen made it harder, but I knew the others definitely couldn't handle it. I only knew the basics of the shooting, so as I watched the guy enter and approach the counter, a sick feeling rose in my gut. My instinct was to yell at the screen in a vain effort to warn Steve, but the stupidity of doing that stopped me. For the first minute, they stood and talked. I couldn't hear about what because the camera had no audio. I was caught off guard when he pulled out the gun. It was so fast. Even without the sound, Steve's fear was plain. He did his best to keep the robber calm, and he was until Steve handed him the money from the register. The robber had chosen the time right before closing to come in. Unfortunately for him, Steve had just dropped most of the cash in a few minutes before, and what he was handed was no more than a $20 bill, a 5 and 5 ones. He must have expected more. He began screaming, and Steve tried to calm him down. He must have known somehow what was about to happen. His expression was of downright horror. Right before the shot came, he said something to the robber. At first, I couldn't tell what it was, but after rewinding the video a few times, I could kind of read his lips say, "Oh God, please don't do it. You don't have to." Those were his last words. 5 gunshots later, his life was over. The video ended with the shooter running out of the store. No one shows up on the screen again until about 1:17 a.m. when the officer stopped to see why the store was still open. He was the one who found Steve's body. When I was positive I had what they needed, I checked to make sure the clip had recorded to the thumb drive. Confident it had, I removed it and dropped it into a manila envelope and sealed it up. The teardrop hitting the envelope was the first hint to me that I'd been crying. I hadn't realized how important a part Steve played in my life. Just to make sure no one would bumble onto it, I locked the envelope in my desk drawer and called them to pick it up. I thought it may comfort you to know that the police know who the shooter is. It sounds like the guy couldn't stop complaining about how little he got, and somebody snitched him out. They haven't arrested him yet, but it's only a matter of time. I'm sure that will be enough to hang him, and that's exactly what I hope they do to him. I know his execution won't bring Steve back, but the thought of that SOB dying, sure, feels good.
When I was 11, my family lived in Alaska, about 14 miles north of Anchorage. As soon as you leave the actual city of Anchorage, you're in the wilderness pretty quickly. This event happened to me in the summer of 1977. During that time, the town I lived in was actually just a series of roads and off-roads. Most of the people there commuted to Anchorage for work. That's what my parents did. They both worked nights, meaning I spent most of my time alone at home, given that I also don't have any siblings. Our house was about a half-mile away from the nearest paved road and surrounded by woods. I didn't have any real friends that lived close by. I just knew a kid who lived at the end of my road, though. His house was actually the next closest to mine. One afternoon that summer, I was watching TV when there was a knock at our side door. I looked outside and saw it was the kid from the end of the street with someone else. I opened the door and he told me this kid was his cousin, whose family had flown up from wherever they were from to visit. I can't remember the kid's name, but I do remember immediately being nervous around this guy. He had blonde hair down to his shoulders, wore a t-shirt under a thin leather vest. He also had one of those wallets on a chain. This kid's eyes were dark as hell. I was 11 and hadn't even seen evil before, but this kid set off something in my brain. The boy from down the street even seemed nervous being around him. He said he had told his cousin about my BB gun and how cool it was. I told them to wait outside and I could get it. I just knew I didn't want that kid in my house. I got the BB gun and went outside and handed it to the weird kid. He rolled it over his hands and looked up and down without his expression ever changing. Without handing it back, he asked me, "How much do you want for it?" I can't remember my reaction after all these years, but I didn't really need money and the gun was a gift, so I told him it wasn't really for sale, and I remember apologizing for some reason. Unfazed, the kid hands the gun back to me, then reaches behind his back and pulls out the biggest damn knife I had ever seen. I remember thinking for a second that it was a sword. The kid said, "How about a trade then?" I shot the BB gun at cans. What was I going to do with a knife? Hunt a grizzly bear? I declined the offer nervously, and the kid turned away and started walking in the direction of their house. So I went back inside and watched some more TV. About an hour later, there's another knock on the door. I go to our side window where I can see the door. I peek out, and sure enough, it's that kid again. This time, he was alone. The second time he knocked was louder. He called my name. I stayed quiet. He left the door and started walking around our house. My mother had a sunroom where she grew plants. It had large windows all along the wall. I saw him go to those windows, press his face against the glass, trying to see deep into the house. I stayed out of sight. Luckily, there were no lights on, and I had turned off the TV when I heard the knock. When he couldn't see anything, he continued around the house. He took out that huge knife and began tapping the butt of the handle along the outer wall as he circled. Then he started saying, "I know you're in there." My heart started racing. Of course, he knew I was in the house. I was 11, home alone. How could I have left the house? Hop in a car and take off? Hell, both our cars were gone anyway. I continued keeping low and quiet, hoping he might think I went to a friend's house somewhere else. How long could this psycho just circle the house? He was maybe 14. He'd get bored pretty quickly. No such luck. This kept up for about an hour. The tapping and his voice telling me to come out, and that he had another trade for my gun. Screw that. I'd already gone all in on the "I'm not home" tactic, so I stayed quiet and made my way to the kitchen where our one telephone was. This was 1977. No cell phones, and our phone was attached to a wall in the kitchen. Luckily, it had a super long handset cord. I got it, stayed low to the floor, and called my mother at work. She took me seriously, but there was no way she could get home. My dad was in the Air Force, and they sure wouldn't let him skip out early to handle his son's crisis. I would have to ride it out. The sun had gone down, and by that, I mean it was barely peeking above the horizon. In the summer, the sun never completely went down in our area. The kid kept pacing around for another 30 minutes or so, and then was suddenly gone. Not being an idiot in a horror movie, I just stayed down and quiet. Eventually, my parents got home. I was still awake. They brushed it off because I ended up being fine. But I never hung out with the kid down the street again, and I pretty much stayed inside the remainder of the summer. There was something wrong with that kid. Maybe it was in my head, or maybe he would have done something absolutely brutal to me, just for that damn BB gun. For the record, my wife and I are pretty normal folks. We don't do drugs, we're social drinkers, but let's just say we don't have a lot of friends, except other couples with children, so basically we don't drink that much. All that to say that when this event took place, we were absolutely lucid and not under the influence. I'm 200% sure of what I saw. My only regret is that I didn't record it or took pictures as evidence. It was summer 2013. My wife was 5 months pregnant, so we decided to look for a nice house to rent in the countryside. We browsed a well-known website and found a small villa near a vineyard. The owner called us very quickly. We will call him Gerald. Gerald was a fellow in his late 50s. His picture on the website displayed a posh guy wearing small glasses. He was really caring and nice. After a little research on the internet, this guy was running an art gallery. He told us he wouldn't be there to give us the key, but a colleague would welcome us. The day we arrived, a Slavic woman in her 40s was there. She gave us the keys, jumped in her black sports car, and left. It took 5 minutes. The house was beautiful. We were so excited to have so much room just for us. 15 minutes after the check-in, we were having a drink by the swimming pool. Something felt weird about the house though. It had clearly been furnished by a home staging designer, as everything was perfect and new. Somehow, the frames had generic pictures inside, like stock pictures. The poses seemed too unnatural, and you couldn't recognize one person from a picture to another. My wife decided to store our empty luggage on the top of a big cupboard, but she clumsily hit a little box and made it fall on the floor. It contained 2 pencils and a keychain with 2 small keys. We put it back where it fell from and started to feel hungry, so we went to cook dinner. The weather was lovely. On that very night, we stayed on the roof and watched the sunset. Then my wife felt exhausted and went to bed. I was reading on the roof when my eyes got stuck on a small staircase behind the pool house. I tried not to pay attention, but ended up heading for that staircase. The stair led to a little cellar. It was a dusty and smelly corridor with a solid oak door at the end. That door was closed by 2 padlocks. I realized I wasn't minding my own business, so I went back upstairs. 1 hour later, I was still thinking about that door and what was behind it. I suddenly remembered the keychain with the 2 small keys. Now it was obvious. I couldn't help going back there to try the keys. Once in front of that door, it was now sure that the key would match. The padlock gave in 2 seconds. When I opened the door, a strong smell hit me, like mold mixed with chemicals. It was clear I just entered a photo lab. On a shelf, hundreds of pictures going from nudes to hardcore pornography. On 5 of them, I positively recognized Gerald with a black woman. She was attached to a rope by the wrists. Utterly shocked, I found 2 plastic boxes with photographs of teen pornography. By the writings on the pictures, it went from 2004 to present days. Near the red room, I found more pictures of very violent bondages scenes. The woman had bruises and cuts. There also was an old camera and a dozen tapes, but my heart was already on the brink of explosion, so I didn't watch any of these. I closed the door and sat by the pool for 45 minutes. I needed to put all back together and decide what to do. I showed the pictures to my wife, and we left the house the very night. We called the cops on our way home, and they told us they'd keep us informed. They never did. 1 week later, I had a message on my phone. It was Gerald. He apologized to us, stating everything I saw was staged. He insisted he worked for magazines and sometimes they ordered shocking pictures. I never believed an inch of what he said. Neither did my wife. I called him back to tell him he had to refund us, as the website asked him to do, but he never answered. I called him again 3 weeks later to ask him to refund, but I reached a grocery store instead. There was absolutely no more trace of that guy on the internet. To this day, we don't know for sure. Still, every now and then, we bring it up knowing we'll never have an answer.
There's a serial killer at Virginia State University. Growing up, my mother had made me watch murder shows with her, which eventually turned me into a paranoid 20-year-old who's afraid of her own shadow. My mother had heard of the killings and begged me to come home, but I couldn't just up and leave in the middle of the semester. I'd just have to stick it out and hope for the best. I wouldn't be worried if the killer had a pattern, but he didn't. He killed men and women. Nobody was safe. So far, 8 students had been murdered, 6 males and 2 females. He branded them too, as if he were proud of what he did. He carved what number victims there were on their foreheads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hey, my train of thought was interrupted by my roommate Emma. Hey, I greeted. How's it out there? Pretty quiet, besides the police cars patrolling, she replied, getting a yogurt out of our fridge and plopping down onto the armchair. Looks like the hash-slinging slasher couldn't wait until midterms were over to begin his little killing spree. Tell me about it, I muttered, flipping through another page in my binder. I'm up to here in study notes. The entire coffee table was scattered with mathematical equations, scientific equations, and 2 English lit books that I had yet to read for next week. "No one told you to take 18 units, Emma taunted, scooping a spoonful of yogurt into her mouth. "Piss off, Em." Sorry. I'll tell you what. Let's go to the library. We still got a few hours to kill before curfew anyway. I got some studying to do too." I sighed. I'd been in our cramped dorm all day. Maybe a change of scenery would help me focus a bit more. "Yeah, sure, why not? I'll try anything at this point," I muttered, and I gathered my things. Emma was right. It was terrifyingly quiet outside. Everyone was too scared to come out of their rooms, even though the murders usually took place in the early morning or late at night. Not Emma though. I guess Emma wasn't afraid of anything. Surprisingly, there were quite a bit of students in the library. Despite everything going on, midterms were still taking place, which to me was a good thing. It kept us distracted from the ugliness outside. "What type of rock is this?" Emma asked, pointing to a sandy and crumbly rock in a geology textbook. "Sedimentary," I mumbled, then went back to solving equations. We studied in silence after that, Emma occasionally asking about another rock she couldn't identify. Having a change of scenery actually did help me concentrate better. All I had left to do was read the 2 English lit books. An hour later, Emma closed her geology book. "I'm beat. Want me to wait for you?" I waved my hand, not bothering to look up from my book. "Nah, go ahead. I'll be there in half an hour." "Okay, see you later," she yawned, before gathering her things and leaving the library. The second book was much bigger, but I figured I could read at least a quarter of it before curfew and continue the rest over the weekend. It was a combination of Othello, Hamlet, Alexander Pope's essay criticism, and about 3 or 4 other stories. I'd finished Othello and gotten to Hamlet when my phone became vibrating. I blindly kept pressing the decline button repeatedly. It was probably Emma and her stupid geology rocks. I was making good time. After Hamlet, I was halfway through Pope when I looked at the library clock. 9:15 p.m. Oh crap, curfew was at 8:30. "I'm dead," I whispered, and furiously gathered my things. I hadn't even noticed I was the last one here. I'm dead. I ran out the door, dropping at least 2 of my pens in the process. It was eerily silent, even more silent than it was earlier. With a nervous sigh, I began fast walking back to my dorm, which was a 15-minute walk. However, with my huge bag and textbooks, it would probably take 25. I pulled out my phone and called Emma, who answered on the first ring. "Where the hell are you? I've been calling you for over an hour." I know, I'm sorry. I lost track of time. I'll be there soon, okay? "I'm meeting you halfway." "Emma, no, just stay there. Look, if I'm not home by 9:50, then come look for me or call the cops. It's too dangerous for you to leave." She huffed in irritation. "Fine, 9:50, not a minute sooner." She hung up before I could reply, and I sighed tiredly, stuffing my phone into my pocket. Breaking curfew too? I jumped 1,000,000 feet in the air, my heart leaping out of my chest as I spun around and met the green eyes of a man. He smiled and ran a hand through his hair. "I saw you in the library. Figured you could use the guardian angel," he said. I'm okay. My dorm isn't far from here," I replied. "I insist. A lady shouldn't be out by herself at these hours, especially not with a killer on the loose." "I can manage." "You can never be too safe. Name's Ethan, by the way," he said, walking alongside me, much to my dismay. "Nice to meet you," I replied. "Are you not going to give me your name?" "No." Ethan chuckled. "Alright, fair enough. What year are you in?" "Junior." "Senior." "Chemistry major." "That's nice." He raised an eyebrow. "You don't talk much, do you?" "Not to strangers in the middle of the night in particular? No," I said. Again, he chuckled. "I can respect that. I promise you I'm not a killer. Just looking out." I know I was being kind of a jerk at this point, but something about this guy just seemed off. I couldn't pinpoint it, but my gut instinct told me this guy was bad news. It was still a 10 or so minute walk to my dorm, so when he came across the north dorms, I took this as my chance to book it. "This is my stop," I said, stopping in front of the building. Thanks. For the walk to my dorm, I mean." He smiled, white teeth shining against the darkness of the night. "Don't mention it. Hey, listen. I know this is a bit straightforward, but could I get your number?" My small smile faded. I'm sorry, I don't know you. I don't just give out my number like that." His boyish smile was replaced with a hardened expression. "Really? I walk you back to your dorm and you can't even give me your number? I never asked you to. I don't owe you anything, Ethan." Gritting my teeth, I turned to walk off, when one of his arms suddenly wrapped around me in a bear hug and the other clamped over my mouth. "You do owe me," he sneered. He began dragging me towards the woods, and I quickly planted my feet into my fighting stance. I stepped on his foot as hard as I could and slammed my head into his mouth. Once he released me, I spun around and elbowed him in the throat. I must have hit his Adam's apple pretty hard because he gurgled and fell to the ground. A man's groin and throat are always his weak spots. He tried to crawl away, and I kicked him in the head. "Well, that's 9 in a row that the terrified, innocent little girl act works," I said, taking my knife out of my back pocket. I flipped Ethan over and pressed my foot into his throat, feeling the crack what was left of his Adam's apple. "When a girl says no, Ethan, she means no," I sneered and stomped his throat. His blank green eyes stared up at the sky, and I smirked. After carving the number 9 into his forehead, I quickly ran to my dorm before Emma could throw a fit. After scolding me for breaking curfew, she went to her room and I went to mine. I wasn't supposed to have a number 9 tonight, but Ethan just had to show up and not give me a break. If you're reading this far, please don't think I'm some monster who targets random individuals, because I'm not. I target those who do nothing but inflict pain. Partner abusers, women abusers, child abusers, and so forth. I think I do a pretty good deed, don't you? As I was about to go to sleep, my phone rang, seeing my best friend's name on it. I quickly answered. "Hello? Hey, how are things over there?" I sighed. I didn't have anything planned, but I got attacked and had to improvise. Aside from that, all is well. That was number 9. One more to go. I know you can do this. Think of the next person you're saving whenever you have to do it. Yeah, I know. I can always count on you. You have no idea how proud I am of you, Chloe.
Our official merch store is finally here. If you want to support more of our channel, check out our merch shop. The link is in the description down below. See you on the next video.